Cruel doctor humiliates black custodian in front of patient, unaware who he really is. St. Edmund's Medical Center, a symbol of prestige and excellence, was about to face an unexpected reckoning. When Samuel Brooks, an aging black custodian with a limp, became the target of a powerful surgeon's public humiliation, he had no idea who the quiet man pushing a mop really was in the hospital. Watching from the corner, a poised woman everyone assumed was just a visitor was about to reveal a truth that would shatter reputations and change the hospital forever. What secret bond tied her to the man they mocked, and how could one act of cruelty spark instant justice? Let's find out. But before we dive into this story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to witness will make your blood run cold. The morning sun poured its pale light over the glass panels of St. Edmund's Medical Center, glinting off the polished floors that had seen more hurry than kindness. Somewhere down the east wing hallway, the muted sound of a mop bucket rolling echoed against sterile walls. That was Samuel Brooks, 67 years old, black, quiet, his posture slightly bent but his steps steady. Most who passed him saw only the uniform, the faded gray shirt with maintenance stitched above his heart, not the man who once carried wounded soldiers out of burning sand in Kuwait. He'd been here longer than anyone could remember, working before dawn and leaving when others were still catching their breath. Samuel didn't mind the invisibility. It was easier that way. He'd learned that people spoke freely when they thought no one important was listening. And in hospitals, secrets clung to the air like disinfectant. Dr. Colin Mercer entered the corridor like a blade drawn too quickly from its sheath. His white coat swung behind him as if it were a flag of authority. He spoke into his tablet without looking up, voice crisp, impatient, commanding. Nurses scattered like leaves. He was the kind of man who liked being feared. It reassured him that he was noticed. When he passed Samuel, his eyes flicked briefly over him with the same interest one might give a piece of furniture slightly out of place. "Morning, doctor," Samuel said softly, respectful. Mercer didn't reply. His shoes clicked like punctuation marks of contempt. A young nurse, Claire, gave Samuel a small, apologetic smile as she passed. "Don't let him bother you," she whispered. Samuel only nodded. He'd seen worse men crumble when bullets flew. Words like Mercer's were nothing more than empty brass. By 7, the hospital began to hum. Phones rang, stretchers squeaked. Someone cried softly behind a curtain. Samuel wiped down the hall railings, humming a gospel tune his late wife used to sing. Every stroke of his rag was deliberate, almost meditative. It was this rhythm that kept him sane, a soldier's patience, a worker's pride. He remembered the desert heat, the blood, the radio static. Back then he had patched men together so they could go home. Now he patched floors so others could forget where they walked. Mercer's voice broke the calm. "Who left this here?" he barked, pointing at a rolling bin that sat near the nurse's station. His tone carried like a slap. "Does no one understand protocol?" No one answered until his gaze landed on Samuel. "You," he said. "Was it you?" Samuel turned, still wiping the rail. "Yes, sir. I was cleaning room 412. I'll move it." Mercer sneered. "You people always have an excuse. Next time, follow instructions. This isn't a street corner, it's a hospital." Claire flinched. "Doctor, he's just doing his job." Mercer's hand cut through the air. "Do not defend incompetence, nurse. If he can't tell sterile zones from supply areas, he should retire." Samuel didn't speak. He lifted the bin, rolled it aside, resumed his work. The silence he left behind made Mercer's words hang heavier, like dust refusing to settle. Behind closed doors, administrators whispered about an upcoming inspection. The hospital's future depended on new investments, and a rumored silent partner, someone powerful, was said to be watching closely. No one knew who it was, and Mercer, like most, assumed it was another rich benefactor in a suit. That evening, Samuel clocked out late. He sat in the empty cafeteria with a cup of cheap coffee, staring at the fading city through the glass. He touched the worn edges of a small metal tag hanging from his keychain, U.S. Army Medic, and smiled faintly. A different life, a different war, but the same endurance. He didn't need anyone's approval. Still, there was something heavy in his chest tonight, something he couldn't name. Maybe it was the way people laughed when Mercer spoke, or how the nurse's apology felt like pity. Maybe it was that somewhere deep inside he remembered what it felt like to command respect, and now he swept floors for men who wouldn't last a week in his boots. When he left, the halls were quiet. The smell of antiseptic lingered like memory. In the staff locker room, he changed slowly, folding his uniform with military precision. Tomorrow would be another day. More cleaning, more silence. He didn't know yet that by tomorrow night, every person in that hospital would know his name. The morning arrived heavy with the promise of tension. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to witness will make your blood run cold. The hospital's glass doors sighed open at 6 sharp, ushering in the scent of rain and the buzz of preparation for the annual accreditation inspection. Doctors were on edge, nurses hurried with clipboards, even the janitorial team had been given extra uniforms, crisp and new, though Samuel Brooks had chosen to keep his old one. The faded gray fabric felt honest. It had survived more years than most of the doctors in that building, and so had he. He moved through the East Wing with the same quiet grace as always, greeting the few who greeted him and enduring the rest. He cleaned around the base of a gurney where someone had carelessly spilled antiseptic. It burned his nostrils and brought back a flash of field medicine days in the desert, where every scent meant survival or death. He blinked the memory away and straightened his back. As voices echoed behind him, Dr. Colin Mercer was already in full performance mode, showing off the ward to an important patient, Mr. Lanford, a wealthy businessman recovering from heart surgery. Mercer's tone was bright, rehearsed, dripping with self-satisfaction. "We pride ourselves on excellence here," he said, gesturing broadly at the spotless corridor. "From the top surgeons to the janitorial staff, we demand perfection. Though," he sided his eyes to Samuel, "some take longer to meet our standards." The laugh that followed was sharp and cold. Lanford smiled weakly, not knowing whether it was a joke. Samuel kept his head bowed, continuing to mop the last patch of floor. Mercer's voice grew louder, as if the janitorial's quietness irritated him. "You know what they say, Lanford. Hospitals are only as clean as the people who sweep them. If only they'd sweep a little faster, maybe we'd all breathe easier."
Samuel wrung the mop silently, but his knuckles turned white. Mercer leaned to the patient. "We've had some staffing issues lately. Folks like him don't always understand sterile protocol. I mean, look at him handling that bucket near the surgical wing. It's no wonder I have to oversee everything myself." The insult hung between them like smoke. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he refused to look up. Years had taught him that silence was its own form of defense. A nurse passing by hesitated, wanting to intervene, but Mercer's stare froze her in place. "Sir," she murmured, "we're due for the board's inspection soon. Maybe nothing," Mercer snapped. "The board wants to see a facility run by professionals, not sentimental staff worrying about janitors. Now get back to your post." His words sliced through the air as Samuel rolled his mop bucket aside and turned down another corridor. Behind him, Mercer chuckled low and self-satisfied. The sound of it followed like a shadow. By mid-morning, the tension thickened. Word spread that the hospital's potential new investor was arriving incognito to observe operations. No one knew who they were. The rumor painted images of billionaires, celebrities, foreign dignitaries. Mercer boasted to his colleagues that he'd impress whoever it was, that the hospital's success depended on people like him. "These investors want results," he declared during a staff briefing. "They don't care how the floors shine, they care how the money flows. So let's not embarrass ourselves with low-level distractions." A few uneasy glances darted toward the door where Samuel stood quietly, waiting to clean once the meeting ended. Mercer noticed him and smirked. "You again? I swear, this place is infested with relics. Can't retire, can you, Mr. Brooks? Afraid the world will forget you exist?" Samuel gave a faint smile. "I just like to keep busy, sir." "Sure you do," Mercer said. "That pension of yours must be thin. Better hang on to that mop." He turned away, laughing with his colleagues. Samuel said nothing, but his eyes lingered on Mercer for a moment longer than usual. The arrogance reminded him of young officers who used to strut across war zones, pretending they were invincible until the first shell hit. Then they'd crumble. The real power, he knew, never shouted. It just acted. The inspection team arrived early. The hospital descended into a nervous frenzy. Mercer strutted like a peacock, ensuring every clipboard was signed, every curtain straightened. He wanted the place to look like his empire. Samuel, meanwhile, worked quietly in the surgical prep area, ensuring every corner gleamed. The smell of bleach was strong enough to make his eyes sting as he pushed the mop forward. One of the inspectors entered, accompanied by Mercer and Lanford, who had decided to watch the tour. Mercer's voice boomed across the sterile room. "Gentlemen, as you can see, our standards are unmatched. Every inch is maintained flawlessly, even by the lower staff, though sometimes they do tend to slow us down." Samuel turned to move his bucket out of their way, but the floor was slick. A thin film of disinfectant caught the wheel, sending the bucket tilting sideways. A splash of clear sanitizer arced through the air and dotted the toe of Mercer's polished shoe. Time stopped for a heartbeat. Mercer looked down slowly, then up at Samuel with an expression that could freeze glass. "Did you just spill chemicals on my shoe?" he said softly, dangerously. "Sir, it was an accident," Samuel replied evenly. "I'll clean it immediately." But Mercer was already raising his voice, loud enough for everyone in the hall to hear. "Accident my foot, you old fool! Do you realize how expensive this footwear is? Do you even know what sterile means?" The inspector frowned, trying to interject, but Mercer was lost in his own fury. "This is exactly what I mean about hiring the unqualified. They shuffle around here like ghosts, contaminating everything with incompetence." Samuel wiped the floor silently, not meeting his eyes. Mercer stepped closer. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, resident fossil!" A gasp rose from the nearby nurses. The insult hit like a physical slap. "Sir, please lower your voice," the inspector said uneasily. "There's no need." Mercer turned on him. "I am maintaining order. If this man can't even handle a mop, he has no business being in a hospital. Get security to escort him out now, before he causes an infection outbreak." "Doctor, that's unnecessary. Do it," Mercer barked. The nurse by the door froze, torn between obedience and decency. Samuel straightened slowly, his back aching from years of bending. His voice was calm, almost tender. "I've cleaned these halls longer than you've held a scalpel, doctor, but if you want me gone, I'll go." The quiet in the room was deafening. Mercer sneered. "Don't get poetic with me, old man. You're a liability now. Move before I have you written up for insubordination." The security guard approached, apologetic eyes lowered as he murmured, "Sorry, Mr. Brooks, just following orders." Samuel nodded once, collected his mop and bucket, and walked out. The entire corridor watched in silence. Only the sound of his wheels squeaking broke the air as he disappeared around the corner. Lanford, the patient, looked uncomfortable. "That seemed harsh, doctor. He's an elderly man. Mercer shrugged. Sentimentality breeds mediocrity, my friend. This is a world of precision. If I tolerate laziness, the whole system rots. The inspector scribbled something on his clipboard. No one said another word. Samuel's locker was small, dented by years of use. He changed quietly, hanging up his uniform, folding it with that same military precision he always did. His reflection in the metal door was tired, but not broken. His mind replayed Mercer's words, but they couldn't touch him anymore. He'd heard worse in jungles, deserts, cities full of hate. What hurt wasn't the insult. It was the laughter that followed, the way people had watched and done nothing as he walked out of the locker room. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Brooks, the meeting is confirmed for noon. Please arrive through the west entrance and bring identification. Initials, ES." He smiled faintly and replied, "Understood." He stepped outside into the gray daylight. Rain misted over the parking lot. The city blurred through droplets on windshields. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. It felt like any other day, except for the stillness inside him, something steady and unshakable that said the tide was turning back. Inside the hospital, Mercer bragged to the staff, "Well, at least that's one problem solved. Maybe we can impress the investor now without janitors tripping over our reputations." A few forced laughs followed, but none reached their eyes. Every nurse who had seen the scene felt something like shame bloom in their stomachs. Claire whispered to a colleague, "He didn't deserve that, Mr. Brooks. He's been here longer than anyone." "Keep your voice down," the colleague warned. "You'll get written up too." Mercer overheard and smirked. "Oh, let them whisper. They'll thank me when this hospital lands a multi-million-dollar contract after today's visit."
He turned to glance at the clock. "Our mystery investor arrives any minute, and I intend to make an impression that lasts." He straightened his coat, adjusted his tie, and flashed a practiced smile. What he didn't know was that the impression he was about to make would last far longer than he could survive it. At precisely 11:58, a black SUV rolled through the gates. The driver stepped out, circled around, and opened the rear door. A tall woman in a navy suit emerged, her expression calm and unreadable. Her name was Eleanor Shaw, chairwoman of the hospital's board, and one of the few who knew the true identity of their silent partner. Beside her stepped another figure, moving slower, deliberate. A man in a dark overcoat, gray hair glinting under the pale light. He wore no badge, no uniform, but the guard at the door immediately straightened when he saw him and greeted softly, "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks." Eleanor nodded to him. "Everything's ready, shall we?" "Let's," Samuel said quietly. Inside the hospital, the intercom buzzed with a nervous announcement. "Attention staff, the Board of Trustees has arrived. Please maintain order during the inspection." Mercer's pulse quickened. This was his stage, his redemption. He adjusted his tie again, plastered a grin, and walked toward the lobby, rehearsing his speech in his head. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to St. Edmund's, where excellence is not just a gall, it's our identity," he muttered under his breath. He stepped into the lobby and froze. The world narrowed to the sight before him. The man beside Eleanor Shaw was the same janitor he had just thrown out 2 hours earlier. Samuel Brooks stood tall, his overcoat neat, his presence commanding, in a way that didn't require volume or threat. Mercer blinked once, then twice, his mind scrambling to rationalize what he saw. Maybe the man had been rehired. Maybe it was some cruel coincidence. He forced a smile. "Mrs. Shaw, may I ask what—" But her eyes silenced him. "We'll discuss this in the conference room, Dr. Mercer. Please join us." Her tone was cool, polite, deadly. Mercer followed, trying to steady his breathing. His hands had started to tremble, ever so slightly. Samuel said nothing, walking beside her with the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove. The staff who saw them pass whispered to each other, confusion spreading like electricity through the halls. No one understood yet, but they would soon. The conference room door closed behind them, and the storm that Mercer had created was finally ready to break. The conference room was cold, the kind of cold that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from something deeper. The kind of cold that settles when truth walks in. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, because what you're about to hear will make your jaw drop. The blinds were half drawn, sunlight cutting thin blades across the polished table. Dr. Colin Mercer sat near the end, his posture too rigid, his throat dry, sweat beginning to gather under his collar. Across from him sat Eleanor Shaw, poised, immaculate, every movement measured. Beside her, the man he had humiliated only hours earlier, Mr. Samuel Brooks, now wearing a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He was silent, his hands folded on the table, eyes steady. Mercer kept glancing at him, searching for familiarity. But it was as if the janitor had vanished and someone else had taken his place, someone who didn't bow or shrink or apologize. The silence stretched until Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was calm, level, as if she were reading from a prepared statement. "Dr. Mercer, this meeting concerns an incident that took place this morning in the East Wing involving your treatment of a staff member." Mercer cleared his throat, forcing a tight smile. "Mrs. Shaw, there's been a sort of misunderstanding. That man," he gestured vaguely toward Samuel, "was interfering with sterile procedure and nearly compromised a patient environment. I had to act decisively for safety protocol." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "You acted decisively, all right, but not for safety." She slid a tablet across the table. "We received footage of the incident. Several staff and a patient's family member recorded your behavior. The board reviewed it." Mercer's face went pale. His fingers twitched toward the device, but he didn't dare touch it. Eleanor continued. "You called an elderly veteran a fossil in front of patients. You ordered security to remove him without due process. You jeopardized this hospital's reputation for professionalism." Mercer tried to recover his composure. "Look, Mrs. Shaw, I understand how it might look on video, but I was under immense pressure preparing for the inspection. I might have spoken harshly, but I assure you, you humiliated him," she said quietly. Mercer stopped. The words hung in the air like a blade ready to drop. Eleanor turned to Samuel. "Mr. Brooks, would you like to say anything before I continue?" Samuel shook his head slightly. "No need. I'm just here to listen." His voice was calm, almost gentle. Mercer's confusion deepened. Why was this man here? Why was he allowed in a board disciplinary meeting unless Eleanor was making some kind of moral example? "Mrs. Shaw, with all due respect, why is the janitor involved in this discussion?" he asked. The word janitor slipped out like venom, even as fear began to coil in his gut. Eleanor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because, Dr. Mercer, Mr. Brooks isn't a janitor, at least not anymore." Mercer blinked, not processing. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said softly, "that the man you threw out of this hospital this morning owns 38% of it." The silence that followed was absolute. Mercer's mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes darted between them as though searching for a punchline. I don't understand. You mean he's—" "The silent majority investor," Eleanor finished. "The very one you were so eager to impress today?" Mercer's body went rigid. A dull roaring filled his ears. "That's impossible. He's been working here for years as a custodian, yes. By choice, not necessity. Mr. Brooks invested heavily in the healthcare fund that acquired this hospital 4 years ago. He wanted to stay close to the people who make it run, the ones most doctors never see. He wanted to understand where the system breaks down.
Mercer's voice cracked. "You're telling me, this man, this Janet, this investor?" "Say his name, doctor." Samuel's voice cut through the air. Not loud, not angry, but solid. Mercer looked up. The older man's gaze was unflinching. It pinned him harder than any reprimand ever could. "Say my name," Samuel repeated slowly. Mercer swallowed. "Mr. Brooks." The words tasted like dust. "Good," Samuel said. "Now we can speak as men." Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands. "Dr. Mercer, we've tolerated arrogance before, but what you did today went beyond poor behavior. It was discrimination. It was cruelty. You belittled a man because of his appearance, his age, and his position. You mocked his service to this country." Mercer tried to speak, but she lifted a hand. "No. You'll have your turn to explain when I'm finished. As of this moment, you are suspended from all surgical duties effective immediately, pending a full review by the Ethics Board. Security will collect your ID badge after this meeting." Mercer's heart pounded, panic breaking through his professional mask. "Mrs. Shaw, please, this can't be necessary. I've given my life to this hospital, my reputation, my patients." "Your reputation," Eleanor said with quiet disgust, "is precisely what we're protecting from further decay." She turned to Samuel. "Would you like to add anything, Mr. Brooks?" Samuel looked at Mercer for a long moment. His voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "Dr. Mercer, I spent 40 years in hospitals, patching up young men torn apart from war. I've seen blood you can't imagine. I've seen arrogance die faster than bullets. I came here not because I needed money, but because I wanted to see if compassion still lived in these halls. I cleaned floors because they ground me, because after the things I've seen, the simple act of wiping away dirt feels like redemption. I didn't need your respect, but I expected your humanity." Mercer's face was ashen. His hands trembled slightly on the table. I didn't know." "That's the point," Samuel interrupted. "You didn't care to know. You looked at me and saw less because it made you feel more." Eleanor watched in silence, the weight of the room pressing inward. Samuel continued. "You wear a white coat and think it makes you clean, but every word you spit leaves stains you can't scrub out. Now you'll see what those stains cost." Mercer's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "Please, Mr. Brooks, I was wrong. I let stress get the better of me. I can apologize publicly. Whatever you want, just don't—" Samuel stood slowly, the chair legs scraping the floor like thunder. "You don't owe me an apology, doctor. You owe one to everyone you made small." Mercer's chest rose and fell too fast. His mind raced, trying to salvage his pride. "Mrs. Shaw, you can't let him dictate disciplinary action. I've been chief surgeon for 8 years. I brought prestige to this place." "Prestige built on fear isn't worth the cost," Eleanor replied. Mercer stood suddenly. "You can't do this! I have contracts! I have privileges! This is outrageous!" "Sit down!" Eleanor's voice cracked through the air like a whip. He froze. "You forget yourself, doctor. This hospital isn't yours, and the man standing beside me has more authority in this room than anyone else, including you. You will remain seated until security escorts you out." Mercer sat down slowly, color draining from his face. He looked like a man watching his own reputation collapse in real time. Eleanor turned to the intercom on the table, pressed a button. "Send in security." The door opened. 2 guards stepped in, silent, professional. One of them carried a small envelope containing Mercer's ID badge collection form. Mercer's fingers twitched. "Mrs. Shaw, at least allow me to explain to the board personally. Maybe—" "The board has already seen the footage. They've also reviewed previous complaints from nurses about verbal harassment. We ignored them too long because of your surgical results. That mistake ends today." She looked to the guards. "Please, escort Dr. Mercer from the premises. His access will be terminated by noon." As the guards approached, Mercer's voice cracked. "Samuel, please, I didn't mean any harm, I swear. I didn't know you were—" He met his eyes one last time. "And if I wasn't, would it have mattered?" Mercer froze, unable to answer. "That's what I thought," Samuel said quietly. Mercer's lips trembled, his shoulders sagged. As the guards took him by the arms, his protests grew weaker. "You're making a mistake. You can't fire me. You need me." "We need decency," Eleanor said without looking up. "We'll manage the rest." They guided him out the door, which shut with a final soft click, leaving behind a silence so heavy it seemed to hum. Eleanor exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. "I should have done this months ago. He's been a problem since before the merger." Samuel walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard below, where patients and families moved like tiny figures in another world. "It's easy to mistake cruelty for strength," he said. "The hospital's full of people like him. They just wear different faces." "Maybe now they'll think twice," she said. Samuel turned slightly, his profile outlined by the afternoon light. "Justice isn't about revenge, Eleanor. It's about correction, mercy when possible, accountability when necessary." "You're still the same idealist from the service days," she said, smiling faintly. "No, just older, and tired of watching good people shrink when bad ones roar." She studied him quietly. "You could have humiliated him worse. You could have called in the press, made a spectacle." "No need," he said. "Time will do that for me." Outside the door, Mercer's voice could be faintly heard as he tried to argue with security, but even that faded, replaced by the low murmur of hospital life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Eleanor stood, adjusting her jacket. "I'll have communications issue a statement this afternoon about the leadership change. The board will back you if you'd like to announce your role publicly now." Samuel smiled faintly. "No, let them learn in time. I'll still come in early tomorrow, same as always. There are floors that need mopping. Respect doesn't grow from titles. It grows from presence." She shook her head. "You really are impossible, you know that?" "That's why you keep me around," he said lightly, the humor in his eyes softening the gravity of the room. She sighed. "Fine, but at least allow the staff to know who you are privately. It might inspire them. Maybe later. For now, let's keep it quiet. People act different when they think they're being watched." Eleanor nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Brooks. Or should I say, Major Brooks." He chuckled. "Not for many years, but thank you." She left the room, leaving him alone for a moment. He looked around the conference table, the same one where men like Mercer had made decisions about people they'd never met. He placed his palm flat against its cold surface, remembering the dozens of times he'd wiped its edges invisible in his own building. Now it felt different. It wasn't triumph, he felt. It was clarity, the kind that came after a long storm. He walked out slowly, down the corridor. Nurses and staff turned to look at him, confusion, curiosity, respect blooming quietly in their eyes. Claire approached, hesitant. "Mr. Brooks, I heard what happened. Is it true?" "Depends on what you heard," he said. "They said you're one of the owners." He smiled. "I'm part of the team." "Sir, I'm so sorry for what Dr. Mercer said earlier. None of us should have stayed quiet." "You did what you could. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's just waiting for the right moment to speak." Her eyes glistened. "Thank you for saying that." "I thank you for seeing me," he said gently, and kept walking, each step echoing softer than the last, but carrying more weight than any speech he could have made. Behind him, the hospital hummed again, cleaner somehow, not because the floors shined, but because something dark had been wiped away. Mercer left the building under escort, his head bowed for the first time in years. Cameras from a patient's relative caught the moment just as they had caught his cruelty earlier that day. By evening, the footage was already online. A storm of outrage flooded the hospital's social channels. People demanded his license be reviewed. Veterans groups issued statements of support for Samuel Brooks. Strangers sent letters, flowers, prayers. The board issued a quiet acknowledgement of Mr. Brooks' contributions, but he stayed silent, letting the noise pass. He didn't need fame. He needed change, and that would come quietly through policy, training, kindness, in hallways where arrogance used to walk. As the sun dipped behind the hospital glass, turning it to gold, Samuel returned to the east wing, the same corridor where it had all begun. He stood for a long time, listening to the faint beeps of machines, the distant laughter from the pediatric ward, the smell of antiseptic and coffee and life. He leaned on his mop handle and smiled softly. Some messes, he thought, were worth cleaning twice. The hospital cafeteria was silent, except for the low hum of the vending machine and the nervous shuffle of feet. Sunlight spilled across the tiles in fractured rectangles, cutting through the stale air that still carried whispers of what had happened in room 314.
Dr. Mercer sat alone at the corner table, his white coat draped carelessly over the chair beside him, his trembling hands wrapped around a paper cup of untouched coffee. His mind replayed the moment over and over. The woman's commanding voice, the unmistakable authority that froze every staff member mid-breath, and the horror of realizing that the janitor he'd mocked, insulted, and humiliated for years was not merely some nameless worker. He had mocked the man who owned him. By the time Mrs. Adler's limousine had pulled out of the parking lot, Mercer's confidence had already begun to decay. People stared when he passed. Nurses who once forced polite smiles now avoided his gaze. The hallway that used to echo with his voice now only returned his silence. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting that morning, and though no one said it out loud, Mercer knew exactly why. He had seen the glances. He had heard the tone of the hospital administrator's voice when she told him, "The board will want to hear your version of events." There was no version that could save him. Upstairs, Samuel Brooks sat on the edge of a hospital bed, not as a worker, but as a guest. Mrs. Adler had insisted that he stay overnight for observation. His vitals were fine, but the doctors had found signs of exhaustion, mild dehydration, and old back injuries that spoke of decades of labor. Samuel had tried to refuse, but she'd silenced him with a look only a mother could give. Now, as he stared at the ceiling tiles, he thought of his late wife, of the promises he made to her the day she died, that he'd stay humble, that he'd work, that he'd never let bitterness make him small. He wondered what she'd say if she saw all this, if she saw the hospital in chaos over a man who just wanted to do his job in peace. Claire entered quietly, carrying a tray. "How are you feeling, Mr. Brooks?" she asked, the same gentle voice that used to whisper apologies after Mercer's outbursts. "I'm fine, dear. Just tired," he said, smiling faintly. She set down the tray and hesitated. "The staff, they're talking about what happened. Everyone knows now." Samuel sighed. "People talk. That's what they do." "But you own this place," she said softly, disbelief and admiration mixed in her tone. "You've been cleaning floors in your own hospital for 15 years. He looked at her then, and his eyes carried both sadness and humor. "Owning something doesn't mean you understand it. I wanted to see what kind of people worked here, who cared, who didn't. The janitor's closet shows more truth than the boardroom." Claire blinked, processing the words. "You let him, Dr. Mercer, treat you like that all these years?" "He let him show himself," he replied simply. Outside the room, footsteps approached, firm, measured, accompanied by the subtle clink of expensive jewelry. Mrs. Adler stepped in, her presence commanding without effort. Behind her came 2 security officers and the hospital administrator, a pale man whose smile was as thin as the papers in his folder. "Samuel," she said warmly, "how are you holding up?" "Still here, ma'am," he said with a chuckle. "I appreciate what you did, but I don't need anyone punished because of me." "That decision isn't yours anymore," she said, her tone soft but absolute. She turned to the administrator.
Have the board reached a decision?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, clearing his throat. "Effective immediately, Dr. Colin Mercer has been suspended pending termination review. There will be a public apology, a press statement, and an internal audit of all staff conduct." Mrs. Adler nodded, satisfied. "Good. I want this hospital to remember that integrity doesn't wear a title." Samuel frowned slightly. "Ma'am, I never wanted this to turn into a show." "This isn't a show," she replied, eyes narrowing. "It's a lesson." Word spread fast. By noon, every major medical blog and local news station had the story. Prominent surgeon suspended after humiliating hospital investor. Outside the hospital, cameras flashed. Inside, Mercer sat in his office, surrounded by awards and certificates that suddenly looked like relics of a man he no longer recognized. The knock on his door made him flinch. "Come in," he muttered. Two men in suits entered. Security. "Dr. Mercer, we're here to escort you to the boardroom." He stood, trying to compose himself, running a hand through his hair. "I assume I'll have a chance to defend myself." "Of course," one of them said, flatly, though his tone carried the emptiness of routine. The boardroom was filled when they arrived. At the head of the table sat Mrs. Adler, her expression unreadable. Beside her was Samuel, dressed in a crisp gray suit, his posture straight, his eyes calm. Mercer froze. He had never seen the janitor like this. It was as if the years of quiet labor had shed from him like an old skin. Samuel looked at him, not with anger, not even pity, but with something deeper, something that made Mercer's throat tighten. Respect denied, yet offered one last time. "Dr. Mercer," Mrs. Adler began, "you have been accused of gross misconduct, verbal harassment, and violation of workplace ethics. Before we proceed with disciplinary action, do you wish to say anything?" Mercer swallowed. I made an error of judgment," he said, voice strained. "I didn't know who he was." Samuel's head tilted slightly. "And if you had known?" The question hung in the air like judgment itself. Mercer stammered. I didn't mean, I thought—" "Thought what?" Mrs. Adler interrupted. "That you could treat someone as less than human because they mopped your floor?" Mercer's face went pale. "I was under stress. The inspection—" "Stress doesn't create cruelty," she said sharply. "It reveals it." Silence. Mercer's composure broke. His shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he whispered, eyes darting to Samuel. "I didn't mean to—" "Save it," Mrs. Adler said coldly. "You didn't apologize when it mattered." She turned to the board. "The vote?" Every hand raised except one. Samuel's. Mrs. Adler noticed. "You abstain?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because forgiveness isn't mine to grant if he doesn't ask for it like a man." His words landed heavier than any punishment could. Mrs. Adler nodded slowly, a trace of respect in her eyes. "So noted. The termination stands." Security stepped forward. Mercer's breath hitched. "Wait," he said, turning to Samuel. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't see you." Samuel's gaze softened, almost weary. "That's the problem, doctor. People like me are always right in front of you, but you never see us until it's too late." The guards took him by the arms and led him out. The door closed behind him with the quiet finality of justice.
Days passed. Reporters camped outside for interviews. Headlines twisted the story into parables. The janitor who taught a doctor humility. The billionaire who swept his own halls. Samuel avoided all of it. He returned to work, though the board begged him not to. When they replaced his uniform with a tailored suit, he laughed and said it didn't fit his hands. Mrs. Adler tried to convince him to retire, to let the hospital staff honor him with a ceremony, but he refused. "I don't need applause," he said, "just clean floors." One evening, as he was wiping down the same hallway where Mercer once shouted at him, Claire approached again. "You really came back," she said, half smiling. "Thought you'd be done with this place." "Nah," he said, wringing out his mop. "You don't abandon something just because it's broken. You fix it." She hesitated. "Everyone's different now. People talk softer. Even the new doctors, they stop to thank you." "Then it was worth it," he said simply. The sound of a distant piano drifted from the waiting room, soft and unhurried. The hospital felt lighter somehow, as if the air had been scrubbed of arrogance. In a corner near the elevators, a new plaque gleamed, dedicated to Samuel Brooks, whose humility reminds us that character, not status, defines worth. Samuel never looked at it. He didn't need to. He knew what mattered couldn't be engraved in brass. Months later, Dr. Mercer stood in line at a small clinic downtown, resume folded in his hands, the smell of antiseptic once again thick in the air. The nurse behind the counter called the next name, but he didn't move immediately. Through the glass partition, he could see a custodian sweeping the floor, a tall man with a calm face, humming a tune. For the first time in his life, Mercer felt something unfamiliar. Not pity, not fear, respect. He lowered his gaze, stepped forward, and whispered, "Thank you." Back at St. Edmund's, Samuel looked out the window at the city dusk. The lights blinked on one by one like distant memories. He smiled to himself, the mop resting against the wall. Justice, he thought, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, quiet, patient, until the world finally learns to see. And that's where we'll leave it. Proof that power doesn't always wear a suit, and respect costs nothing until it's too late. What did you think of Dr. Mercer's downfall? Did he deserve forgiveness, or was justice served perfectly? Before you scroll away, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you want more stories with shocking twists like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your next favorite story might be the one we tell next.